Okay, so I'm going to minimize that. It'll run while we're running. Bring back up Visual Studio. Okay. Are we mostly ready to go? Log in. Okay. So what we're going to do is the first assignment, which is really close to what we did in the demo last time. And this will be the last one we can do without the virtual machine, because the database won't run on the underlying machine because of permissions. They basically give you no permissions on the underlying machine. If you're doing this at home, you do not have to do a virtual machine, and I advise you not to unless you just really need to keep it separate. If you're doing it on a Mac, you do have to have a virtual machine or dual boot, which Macs supposedly do really well. For anybody, you have to have a fair amount of disk space, though. All right, so I am going to do a new project. And the project is going to be a web application. And it's C#. One of the things you need to be careful of, depending on how you set it up, is don't go in with Visual Basic. Everything will look weird and nothing will work that I do. I'm not very fond of Visual Basic. You could do it with C++, but I wouldn't advise that either. So we're just going to do it. Visual C#, ASP.NET web application. I'm going to call it, what do I want to call it? I'm going to call it first assignment. Although I should probably, this is a long name, but oh well.
Make it first assignment.
I think there's a first assignment.
It's called first look.
Yeah, it's called first show, first look. But I think there's one already up on the blog. I mean, up on GitHub.
Oh, they'll just say first assignment SP18.
Yeah, SP18 would be good. Something to differentiate it, or first look as.
Oh, yeah.
I could do first look. One couple things about naming. You can name it whatever you want. Can't have spaces. The other thing is that once you've named it, it's the namespace. It's really hard to change the name after the fact. This is your chance to name it. Also, generally you want it to go where the default is, particularly when we start using GitHub, because that's where it's going to expect it to be. Notice how it says repos. It's automatically going into a GitHub repo that you can then, connect and upload. It works pretty well most of the time. But as I said, we'll set it up, I think, next time. What else do I want to say about that? You could change the path, but if you're going to change it, you have to change it now. There's no changing it later. Does that make sense? So I'm going to do, okay. Is there anything else I need there? It pops up another dialog box, and this is where you could do an empty one. If we did an empty MVC, we could, build it all from scratch, and you'd have total control. But that's a lot of work, and we won't be doing that for the most part this quarter. But I think if you, once you get the hang of it, you could work on it. Basically, do it from scratch. We give you a good feel for that. We're not doing web forms or web API or a single page or Azure. So we'll just do MVC, and then we'll just do OK. And we'll pretty much do that every time. I used to show a lot of different things from ASP.NET, but I think it was even more confusing than just doing one thing. And again, this is the thing that when I've talked to people at Microsoft and people that use these tools, MVC is a real common tool that they use.
I think it's also another ideation language.
Right. MVC is not a Microsoft concept. Model view control is what they call a pattern. You can actually buy books of different common patterns. MVC is one of the most common patterns, model view control. There's other patterns like the Sentinel, where you have a class that's constantly pinging other classes to see if something's changed. The factory classes pattern, where you have a class that creates other objects for you. I mean, there are lots of different patterns. But the MVC is one of the most common. And again, the idea is separating out functionality. Model is the data layer. The controller is the business logic and moving things from the data to the forms. The views are basically the layer for the interface with the user. All right, so it gives you a lot. And again, I'm going to talk through these again because I think we did go through them, but most of these we can kind of ignore. We're going to do controllers, models, and views, right? And the app data is if you're actually storing the database file in the app. Makes it a little bit more movable. Does that make sense? You're not tied to a particular database string. The database is there, but it has some limitations, and I'm not going to do that. So we're going to pretty well ignore that. There are a lot of references there. I'll open it and then I'll close it. We're not going to worry about them either, but I'll show you. These are all references to libraries that will be in use. Does that make sense? There's a lot of .NET, .web, etc. We're going to kind of ignore them, but if you do it from scratch, you'd have to add those libraries as you need them, I believe. The app start just has the config files. Sometimes you do need to go in and mess with the config files. We shouldn't have to most of the time, but I just want you to let you know that they are there. Content, weirdly, is the Bootstrap CSS. So Bootstrap is a JavaScript framework for basically for applying CSS to your web page. It gives you a lot of things built in. It makes the page automatically, there's a word for it, where you collapse it and it's still valid. Responsive. Responsive, that was the word I was looking for. It makes it automatically responsive. It makes menus. It has built-in menu things where you can just refer to it. It has table styles. It has a lot of different styles built into it that make formatting really easy. You could ignore that if you want. You can also override it in particular areas with the site CSS. Right, that's the local CSS. Controllers, you get one for free when you do the template. You get the home controller. If we look at it, it has really not much in it. It has, notice it's the class is home controller. This is our first look string 18. Remember, that's our namespace, and then dot controllers because it belongs to controllers. And basically, it's just returning views. All of our controllers will have this pattern. And one of the very first assignments after when we get into the database thing is to run the wizard that creates views and controllers and everything for you. And the reason that we'll do that is that it will give us a template for building our own, right? It lets you see how things look. But this is real simple. Action results is the kind of method that it uses in MVC. It's just a Microsoft, how they set it up. When you do a return view like this, it just means return the web page as is. You're not passing it any information or anything. You're not, it's just whatever the web page is. But in the Microsoft model view control, if you don't have a method in a controller, it will not launch the page. Right? You can't get to the page if there's not a method for it. So you have to, even if you're doing nothing, you have to have a method. The method has to have the same name as the view. So there's an index page in the view. There's an about page in the view, and there's a contact. We can see that if we go over here to views and we look at home. There's and about, contact, and index, right? They map directly to those methods. So and stop me whenever you have questions.
So we get the main home page and then 2 other pages.
Right. You get these for free. They just give it to you. This is again in the template. If you go empty, you don't get these. And sometimes going empty would be better because if you don't like this bootstrap layout and stuff, undoing it may be more work than just starting from scratch. Does that make sense? This view bag is basically like a server-side cookie. It stores a text that you can pass, that you can access from the web page. And then, so the 2 of them have your application page, your contact page. Let me go, I'll go to the index here. Just show it real quickly and then we'll do it. Notice there's a view bag that gives a title. The class Jumbotron, that's a bootstrap class, CSS class. It gives you a bunch of stuff, but you can undo most of this. In fact, later on, we will go through and we'll get rid of a lot of that stuff because it's mostly there to show you just to introduce this. So I'm going to run this. And it's running on Edge, but it can run on, if you want to run on Firefox, if you want to run on Chrome, whatever, it works, right? It generally, when it renders underneath, it just renders HTML. All the work is done on the server. I'm going to zoom down for just a second, just because the web page is already kind of large. So this is what the index web page looks like. And when we go in there, so this is the Jumbotron. These are the menus. We will, when we go in there, we'll change this so it says our application, and we'll change the menus. We'll add stuff to the menus. Those things are fairly trivial, but they can take it, and we can just delete these, right? Those are just comments that they can give you. If we go to home, to about, notice this was what was in the, which one? I forget which one was in the view bag. One of these 2 was in the view bag. And contact has the same thing. It has the phrase, your contact page, I think was what was in the view bag. All right. So I think I've shown, let's go back. I'm going to kill this. And notice it's still running. So I'm going to zoom up again real quickly. If it'll let me. There it goes. All right, so this little red thing, or you can go to debug, stop debugging. That little red thing stops it. Killing the website doesn't stop it, just to let you know. And if you suddenly find that your toolbox, well, actually we don't use the toolbox, but if you suddenly find that things are gone, it may be because you're still running. Like the this page, Solution Explorer, generally doesn't show up if you're running. I'm going to kill that. It'll notice. What?
The when I close Chrome, it stops it.
When you stop it in Chrome, it stops it?
Yeah.
It's interesting. I wonder why. That's good, though. Actually, it's kind of annoying to have to double kill it. If you have different, one of the things about Visual Studio is that it's a really complicated environment. The community one is not as bad because it doesn't have a lot of the team tools and things like that. So, but it's still, there's a lot going on in Visual Studio. And it's easy to get lost. It's also easy to lose windows. But you can do, whenever you lose a window, if you go to View, you can get it back, right? View has all the windows. They're also all floatable, which if you have like the typical Microsoft developer, if you have 3 big monitors, is really nice because you can put all your toolbars in one, the code in another, and your help files may be in the third one, or watch a movie on the side, whatever. So you can move these. If you want to return them to a doc, see that little cross? If I go to here, having trouble, but it'll pop it back over there. It's a little bit of a pain to redock, but you can do. But everything is movable, everything's floatable. And if you get rid of it, so say I lose the Solution Explorer, I can get it back by going, actually that was a Server Explorer, I can get it back by going there. And it's pinned right now, you can unpin it and it'll float to the side. Every thing here has, if you want to get rid of it, you can click that little pin and it's there, but it's, you know, it's out of the way. Particularly on a laptop without much real estate, that can be a good thing. I tend to leave the Solution Explorer open because it's a list of all your files. All right, so we did controllers. I'm not going to mess with fonts. There are some fonts in there. I guess you could download fonts if you wanted other fonts. Models we're going to mess with in just a moment. Models are where the data is. Scripts are all the jQuery and JavaScript things that are necessary for Bootstrap. And you could, we're not going to, but I know a couple of you are taking JavaScript. In the web page itself, you can add all the JavaScript you want if you really want to do that. The shared folder under views we're going to mess with because all of the web pages you see under a view are not complete web pages. If you look at them, you'll notice there's no HTML at the top, there's no HTML at the bottom. They are basically like PHP includes. So they're chunks that get put into the framework of a bigger web page. That makes sense. So there's like, all of these are basically, there's just one web page and they just get put into the whichever chunk you call them, just put in there. Does that make sense? It's not an atypical way to do it. It's actually fairly typical, even in other languages and things. So are we ready to start actually writing?
Did you walk through the layout before? Or?
I didn't. We could look at the layout. I was going to go there when we get there. So notice the layout has the HTML and it has the doc type. So it's HTML5. It has all sorts of things here, which we can, I would suggest leaving the styles and scripts. The meta name, I don't know. You could leave that if you want. This you can change, right? You can change the title. A lot of this you can, I would probably leave. You can change your application name. Notice it has, it basically links to home. Action links are like buttons or hyperlinks, except that they give you a little bit more. Notice it says home, index, home. Home is what you want to show on the menu. It's the text. We'll go back to this again too. Index is the name of the file, and home here is the name of the folder for the views. So we'll add our email thing here, and we'll add it to the menus, and I'll show you how to do that. And then we'll mess with some of this just to get, you know, make it look better for us. Okay. The navbar collapse, and navbar nav. Those are just Bootstrap classes. I'm not sure about Bootstrap's naming conventions. Okay. So let's start the first assignment then. So this is just, we've created the application. So generally you have a model, and we are mostly going to get our model from a database except for today. But there will be times when we'll go in and we will add our own model. Mostly we'll do that in order to like combine database classes, because like when we do a new person in community sys, which is what you'll be working with, there is a table, and there'll be an entity for the person, there'll be an entity for the address, there'll be an entity for the contact. It would make a lot of sense to just do them all together, right? And so we'll create a class that basically combines the other classes, but then when you write it, actually I have a stored procedure which will do the writing for you, and I'll show you how to do that. So we will occasionally add classes, but you don't, sometimes the database classes are just fine. So I'm going to add a new model. So what I'm going to add is actually a class. And we're going to add a C# class because the models are basically just, yeah. Question?
I just want to make sure.
All right. All right, so let's do the file then.
Yeah, so this thing, when you build it, builds about 50 files from scratch. It's like, that's why you have this thing, this is why I'm saying it's about $7,000. It does a lot of work. So a lot of it you don't use, but it's there to use. But 50 files, boom, like that. So what you did in Web 20,
So yeah, we just want to class it, name
it
it.
does it, poof, and then you just dig around the whole thing.
So you can right-click on models,
scratch,
add
this
class.
thing does it all. Then I get to stick around with the
That's on the assignment, it's called mailing.
All right, let's call it mailing.
So this all comes under along with
Every time you do a new project, about 50 files.
Yeah, there's a lot of files here. So I'm going to call it mailing. Actually, let me do a capital because that's the naming convention for. So I'm going to add it. And what we'll get is like right here. So we get a class. Notice it's in first look SP18 on mine because it's whatever you named your project. .models. And we're going to class mailing. And what we need is we need to add some fields to this. Again, model classes are mostly about just storing data, right? When we get it from the database, which I'll talk more about when we do it, you actually get two classes. You'll get a mailing and you'll get a mailings. Each mailing will represent one record. If you think of a database, mailings will be a collection of those mailing, right, classes.
So this is done through models, add
Class.
class.
And then I named the class mailing. Anybody need me to do that again? All right, so all I'm going to do here is I'm going to add public. So we said we wanted last name, right? Oh, and I need to say what kind of thing this is. String. And then I'm going to do get set. And we talked about that. It's a shorthand for creating getters and setters. I like it because it saves a ton of type. It's important that they're public. And let me capitalize. And probably I should do a capital on the name there too. Just for naming conventions, it actually won't affect whether it works or not. And then the very last one I'm going to do is the email.
Yes, give me hold on for a minute.
Sure. Do you guys have questions about this? We talked a little bit about it, but I can explain more if you want.
Yes, how do you have like references?
It should just do it automatically. With the presentation. It isn't going to.
I just was wondering, yeah, that's what it seems like.
See there, right, it should match the
Just wondering if
beginning.
it was like a plug-in to it. Okay.
It might just be the version you have.
Oh, yeah.
We do it that way.
It's actually possibly a setting that can be turned on or off.
I'll check it out.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah.
is it okay to give it extra?
Shoot.
Yeah.
They actually don't relate to poster. So if you've ever done Java or any other programming language that has objects, these are called fields, and fields are variables, class level variables that describe the object. And typically what you do, I'm going to do a little Java on here, is you would say private
I'm getting this number.
I used to have a,
string,
when you're doing it from the beginning.
let's say last name.
Oh,
And in Java, that'd be lowercase. Okay. So you've created a private variable. And then what you want to do is you will do public
name is it name? Name is not.
void, actually public, yeah,
Oh,
void. So we'll say set last name. And it takes a string, I'm just going to say L. And then you would say last name equals L. So basically what you do is you're passing in a value and you're setting the value. Get would say public string get last name. It's really a rattly board, isn't it? And then I would say return last name. So this could take a lot of explanation. So part of object-oriented theory is that your variables, your class level variables should be private. They should be private to the class. But, and that's part of what's called encapsulation. But you may want to expose those things for other classes to be able to access. And if you want to let them be set from another class, you create a set method. And if you want them to be another class to be able to see the value, you create a get method. You don't have to create a get and a set for each class, right? Or for each variable. If sometimes you may only want people to see it, sometimes you may only want them to change it, like a password. You may want them to change it but not be able to see it. You could also leave it private if it's only used internally. But that's part of the idea of object-oriented structure. What Microsoft has done is they just shorthanded it. They just made it really quick and simple. These automatically on the compiler, it generates set and get statements. So we don't have to write them because it automatically generates them. If you're ever in Java, if you're in Eclipse, if you right-click on a variable, it has the option generate get and sets, and it'll write the get and sets methods for you as well. Okay, that's actually our whole model, though. Are you guys okay with it? So as I said, our models will get much more complex when we get into the database. But this is really simple. So having created a model, notice that it's right there. It's mailing CS is under models. I'm going to create a controller. So I'm going to right-click on controller. I'm going to add, and what I want to add is a controller. Does that make sense? Now, we're going to do an empty controller, and 99% of the time, that's what we're going to do. The very first assignment after this, we will do an assignment that says, controller with views because it will let it generate the views and the controllers. But we're
That's
not
the
going
only
to.
deviation, right?
Yeah, mostly we'll do empty. It's better to write your own, I think, than to let the wizard write them because unwriting what the wizard does takes a lot of work. All right, so we're going to do empty, and I'm just going to do that, and I'm going to do add, and then it'll ask me to name it, and I'm going to call it mailing controller. Names are important here, and I'll show you. I can't type. Names are important here because when I create this controller, all right, so it gives me a little minimal controller here. Notice that there is now under here, there's a mailing folder. Right? I probably should have capitalized it, but whatever. There's a mailing folder there. Your controller is mapped directly to a folder, always for views. So what you name the folder is what you name the controller is what the folder name will be.
In the models, you had capital mailing.
I know, I should have capitalized
Okay,
this.
but typically you'd have it consistently, right? Like mailing controller.
Yeah, it would be nice if you typed consistently. I'm not good at that necessarily. Yeah, caps would be good. Oh, so it is actually. It says it's a naming. So I'm going to. I changed that to mailing controller. I changed the name. It had 3 dots under it. Said it was a naming violation. I think if I do that, let me rename this, and this could all go bad on us. I'm going to make it a capital M there too. It's just a naming convention rule. It had 3 dots under it that said that it was a violation of the rule. It is possible that the way that Microsoft works this, that it does need a cap. I don't know. So let's see if that works. I'm going to build. Building compiles it. Again, for those of you that have done mostly Python interprets line by line. C# is a compiled language, which means the whole thing is turned to machine language in one big chunk. And the reason I'm building it is to see if I have any errors after changing the caps.
You change it in the text. You have to also change it on the Solution Explorer as well.
I did. I right-clicked and renamed it.
Oh, okay.
And the reason I compiled is to see if that generated any errors, and it doesn't look like it did. So you guys don't have to compile at that point if you don't want. I just wanted to make sure I hadn't screwed everything. All right, so we have an index. One of the things that I'm also going to do here, and we'll have to do this quite a bit, is I'm going to say using. Using is how you add libraries. Right? What does Python use? Does it use import? Imported makes a lot of sense, but this is says we're using. And what we're going to be using is, I want first look SPA, our assignment, dot models, because we want to be able to see the model. It's gray here. Notice that these are gray and this one isn't. So what gray means is that it's being used. Right now it's not being used, but it will be used pretty soon. Does that make sense? These are libraries that they're giving us. Generic is good. We will actually use it in a moment because we'll use a list. Link we'll use later. Link is a query language, the C# language that resembles SQL, actually.
What's the key on the left side of it?
This?
Yeah.
It's not really a key. It's a light bulb to show you the potential. So I don't know, what is it going to say? I'm not using it, so remove unnecessary usings, but it is a necessary using, so the help is not helpful. I just haven't used it yet. I am going to, just because I think it's a better practice, I'm going to make a separate method. I'm going to make it private. And I'm going to return a list of mailing. And I'm going to do add, just name the method add mailings. Again, we're going to do something that we're not going to do after this, which is we're going to just manually enter the data. I mean, generally we'll get the data from the database, but this time we're just going to manually. Notice generic is there, and models is now being used too. And the reason why generic is there is that list mailing is a generic. It's given its type at runtime. That's what a generic is. It's something you give a type at runtime. And its type is going to be the mailing class. And also because I referred to the mailing class, the models thing is dark enough too. The reason this is underlined is I haven't done a return statement yet. Does that all kind of make sense? C# I know is an alien territory for most of you. So it'll become more familiar. If you've done Java, a generic in Java looks exactly like that. All right. So what I'm going to do is I am going to just mailing m equals new mailing, and I'm just going to add like 5 of these. This is really, you'd never do it this way, but notice when I do an m dot, I can see the last name. Anybody have a good last name for this? What? I didn't hear you. I'm just going to do Brown. Semicolons. Remember the semicolons. Every command ends with a semicolon. Blocks don't. Blocks are like a method or a list. They have curly braces, right? I'm going to do m.firstname equals, oh, let's do the California governor. Sorry. And then I'm going to do m.email equals, I'm just going to say jbrown @gmail.com. Oops. And then a semicolon. Okay, and I'm going to do like, oh, I did a single quotes there. That's because I've been doing a lot of SQL. So I'm going to copy this. Do you guys know what the mailing m equals new mailing, what that's doing? It is creating a new object. It's telling me I can do it more simply. And there are ways to do it more simply, but this is real clear. So I copied it, and I'm just going to change this to M1. And we need a different name. So let's do Taylor Sue. And then I'll just change this to Sue Taylor or S Taylor. Doesn't matter what you type here. I'm just trying to get something to show up on the web page. So I'll paste it again. And I'll do M2. Making up names is always hard. Okay, one more. Just to have, so we have at least 4 things to show. Anybody have a name they prefer? We don't have a Smith yet.
Steve Smith.
On Steve Smith instead of John. Okay, so we have those. One of the, and this needs to change. This needs to be M3. Now we need to add them to our list. So I'm going to create a list, mailing with a capital M. What do we want to name it? Mailings. Equals new list. You need that up a little bit. Okay, let me finish that. And then I will lift it up a little bit. So what I'm doing is I'm making a new object, a list. The new keyword, which Python lacks, basically says to reserve a place of memory for this object that we just created. So, and the reason that Python lacks it is that it's interpreted. So it allocates things as it goes, line by line, whereas this has to allocate them ahead of time, right? So when the compiler reaches this, it says, okay, I'm going to need to save a bit of memory for this class. And then what I'm going to do with mailings is I'm going to add, and basically what I'm going to add is M, and then I'm going to go through and copying that again because I'm going to add M2 or M1, M2, and M3. Right. And then I need to, it's still got this thing here because I need to return mailings. So again, this is we'll never do that again, but that's just populating it with something so we have something to display.
But it is something you just want to do from scratch.
Yeah.
Practice.
And it shows you what a class, so we created a class, we're using the class, we're using the fields to populate the classes.
And when you go through models or something, the stuff will auto do it.
A lot of this will be done.
It will be done for you.
The data will come from the database.
Ad nauseam.
Right. So it'll populate from the database. So you won't have to do this manually. And there will be a mailings class in that is essentially a list. They actually call them a dictionary. But they'll basically be a list of these mailing classes. So you have one mailing class is one record. Mailings is a list of all of those records, right? And that will be true when we do the entity wizards too.
Is that it for this file?
It's it for this. Well, no, actually it's not, because we have to do something with this, right? So what we want to do is we want to pass this to the view so that we can display them in the view. And it's pretty easy. I am just going to say, so I'm going to say another list, mailing. And it could have the same name or you can name it something else because they're in different scopes. I'm going to say it is equal to add mailings. Except I have to spell it. All right. Do you guys know why I can say that? This one returns a list, right? So I don't have to make a new list here. I do have to make a reassignment. It doesn't have to be named mailings. And maybe it shouldn't be in order not to confuse. But I'm basically calling this method which returns a list, and I'm saying that this list is equal to whatever the list that returns. But I do have to have a list to receive that list. Does that make sense? As a copy. It's actually not a copy. It's, we won't go into that. It's a pointer. And then what I'm going to return in the view is mailings. And this is always weirded. It's weird, but it won't work if I don't do toList. Even though it is a list, it wants to return it as a list. It should return, and we could try it. It should return without toList, but a lot of times it seems to fail if you don't say toList, even though it is a list. It's a bit weird. So what we're doing is we're going to return the view index, and we're passing it this list of names. And there's a lot of times that we'll be passing things to the view. And the return will let you pass something. If you need to pass more than one thing, you have to use a view bag. We're not going to do that right now, but because you can only return one thing. Now this list has many different things in it. You all right? There you look like. Yeah, this one's private. It does. Again, it would work public, but it should be. Yeah. Okay. Let's see what the errors are. I think.
And you think this big block here? I also do this in my typed notes.
Well, not only naming conventions, it's case sensitive.
They definitely want to do this.
Yeah, I got a question for you, Steve.
Yeah.
This is where I know a lot of guys get that can't beat the third bench. Or speeds it.
We had that last time. It worked.
Yeah.
Wait, last time it was just
Is it because it doesn't exist yet, or? It just says you need a new option. We don't have to use it.
This was a new line. And then we modified this line to be not mailing to list. Add mailings.
I think once we make the view, let's see what happens. It's weird that you get that though, and I don't, or anyone else get that.
I know.
All right, so let's create the view. Are you guys need a minute here? Got it? So we're passing the mailings list to the view. Just as kind of reiterate, we made a model, which is going to be basically a class to store data. We made a list of the data. In the controller, we have a mailing controller, which I wonder if I should rename that with a capital M too.
That's why.
I'm going to build again just to make sure I haven't screwed things up. Yeah, it's fine. Okay. So I changed my controller to a capital M2 over here. Weirdly, this is the class name. This is the file name. They don't have to match. But I think it makes sense if they do. In Java, they do have to match, but they don't have to in C#. All right, so I'm going to make a view. So in mailing, the folder here, I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to add a view. The view has to be named index. That's the method I have in the controller. It has to have the same name as the methods in the controller. If you don't have a method in the controller, you will not be able to get to the view. Yeah.
Sure, what folder are we adding the view?
View in the mailing views. Mailing. Yeah. Just index. Index. So again, the name of the view has to be exactly the same as the method. Let's go back to the controllers. Our method here is called index, so the view has to be called index. If you wanted to name the view something else, you'd have to name the method something else. Does that make sense? It doesn't have to be index, it could be something else. So let's go back to
The name was index?
yeah, it's index. It has to be at index. The view has to be index as well. What? So the controller will load this file. Right now there's nothing on it, right? So we're going to add a few things to this. This is still pretty small, isn't it? You don't have to do this. This is a side thing. I'm just going to try to make it bigger. I will do this when we get into the other one too. It's going to be quite a bit bigger. Is that better?
Yes.
So one of the things I'm going to add is a model. And I'm going to, this could take a lot of explaining. IE numerable, actually that shouldn't be like that. It should be here. First, what is the name? First look, SP18 dot models dot mailing. Okay. So what we're doing is we're making a reference to that model class in the view. IE numerable is what they call an interface, and it just guarantees that what you're doing is loop, that you can loop through it. It means that it has an iterator, and it basically just says you can loop through it. It's a pain to put that in there, but it won't work if you don't. And then basically this is our application models, and then we're referring to the mailing. When we do it later, you know, you'll do something similar to this. You don't always have to do a numerable, only if you're doing a loop. But if you're not doing a loop, you can just do model, first look 18 models, and then whatever class you want to see. Right? Does that make sense? IE numerable is only necessary when you're looping through the data. And we're going to loop through the data. And what I'm doing right now, what I'm going to do under the index here is we're going to add a table, and then we're going to loop through the data and add table rows. It's exactly the way you would do it in PHP, except you'd use PHP language. But I mean, it's exactly the same structure. So I am going to, first I'm just going to create a table. This is just HTML. And I'm going to give it the class equals table, which is a bootstrap class. Okay. When I press enter, it closes table. I am going to create a table row. I'm going to do th for table heading. I'm going to do at HTML dot display name for, and then I'm going to do, this will take some explanation, but first I'll do it. I'm going to do model equal sign that I'm going to do, and then I'm going to do model dot, and I'm going to do last name, and then I'm going to close that. That's weird, but once you've done it, you can kind of copy and paste it. So the HTML, whenever you have the at here, that means that you're doing C# scripting. It's called Razor. All right, not that it matters a whole lot, but you can, if you ever go out and people say, have you ever done any razor? You can say, yes, you have. It's C# scripting in the page. It's a lot like PHP. You have to mark that it's a PHP script, right, inside the web page. The web page does not understand this, nor does it understand PHP. That's based on the compiler that's on the web server. Display name for means it's going to display the column name. Right, if you're thinking of it coming in from a thing. So this will say, basically it's just going to say last name, but it's taking it from the data. You don't have to do that. You could just type in the headers if you want. But I will do it from the class just to show you. This is called a lambda expression for anonymous functions, and that could take us the rest of the quarter to explain. So let's just accept it. Lambda expressions exist in Python, they exist in Java, they exist in C++, they become really common. Basically, they are pointing to a function you don't see. It's basically, you can write them out, you can make your own Lambda things that require Lambda expressions, but it's not this class.
And you, 2 more times, right?
Right, we need it 2 more times, so I'm going to just copy this. There are a lot of times in this class when I'll advocate copy and paste. I forgot the opening bracket. You can just what? Control. Oh, okay. I didn't know that. This will be first name. Do Control D. Does it duplicate it? Yes, it does. I did not know that. That's nice to know. This one needs a cap on first. And then this one will be email. Okay, so does that make sense? Basically, we're getting access to the model that we passed in. We're going to do the same thing here, but those are just the headings. Now we're going to do the actual rows. So I am going to do at, and I'm going to say for each, which is a type of loop. It's basically it loops through where you don't have to tell it what the limit is. It'll just loop through for each item in the list. And that's essentially what we need to say is for each, and I'm going to call it var item. Var is a built-in type that basically says we'll resolve the type at runtime. And it's going to be in model, and I don't remember if this needs to be capped. I'm going to do it capped and see. I'm going to do curly braces, again, because this is C# scripting, so the curly braces mark the limits. And basically inside the loop, I'm going to make a table row, and then I'm going to do TD. And it'll be a lot like this, except I'm going to say at HTML dot display for. Display for, the difference is that this will display the data rather than the header, right? Rather than the field name. And then it's a lot, pretty much the same here, except model. And then it's item, because item is what's the variable that we're looping through. Item dot last name, and we close the parentheses. So it's very similar, it's just that we're doing the item from the loop. And then you can do that. Oops. The lead didn't work there. You have to be up here. And then I'm going to change this to first name. And then I will change this to email. So we've got a table that will loop through and display our data. Okay. And we'll do this at different times with stuff we're getting from the database too, right? So Again, the point of this first assignment is just to give you the lay of the land, right? And as I said, it's a little complicated, but we do the same kinds of things over and over again in different contexts, just different
So
data.
we'll have the column headers and then it'll loop through.
It'll loop through the
four
data.
items we did, kind of like an array. And
Yeah.
instead of like walking through a for each of 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 3, it's going, what stuff you got in there? Could be 40,
Yeah.
could be 40, could be 40.
For each is basically just say, they'll just go to end of file, whatever that is. They'll just go to the end. So you don't have to specify the number of loops, which is really nice because a lot of times you don't know, right, when you're bringing in the data.
I will say, though it won't occur anywhere in this class, I have been in contexts where the for each is not good because it has to determine the link. It sometimes is really slow. It's not an efficient loop.
Does that make sense?
So like maybe an indefinite loop that's,
Well, one of the things you can do, one of the properties of a list is you can find the number of items in the list, and you could do a regular for loop if you have to.
oh, actually, it's just, yeah, it's speeded up, yeah.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to try to run this. All right, so this is our main, this is our index for mailing. So I'm going to do that. And it should run and it should populate.
Okay.
So again, I'm really big because of my Zoom. Let me unzoom for a moment. Because the page is already.
So notice it did, it brought our 4 things up here and it added our table. The way this table looks, that's from the Bootstrap, right? That's the styling from the Bootstrap. How did you guys do the work? Not work? Did you ever return at the bottom? So return the image. Let's look at your. Yeah. Okay, so you need to return Oh.
Ah,
Lower screen, just try it.
always.
This list is not space.
You see what's in here? It's like, why did I get the last one? So when you go here, what's special about Steve? It's last. Again. Hey, I have all the, right here.
You have to change everything to
Yep.
Go back to your,
Then I forgot something about the top of the case.
Yeah. Because first, what is your? Right, that won't work. You really can't change it. I know what. I don't know that you can change it on this one. You specified it. It's like a Wednesday place. Do it, Doc.
Yeah.
It's got lines.
It will build.
This man, this, and this.
And then. And then I'm gonna close. It's not a good one. Because it's in that one more close. Now you go back. I'll be over in a moment. Yeah, right. Well, actually, stop it. Tiny bit more I'm going to do on this.
I know there's more stuff that popped up when I put that there, that's.
Go back this, running from your.
Well, this wouldn't be mailing to this, it would be mailing. And the lowercase. So what is it not like about me?
I did. And that's what so.
No. You need to be able to run.
The last letter from 4, something like that. You want it to be full. Oh, yeah. Okay, that's it. I'll be looking at it. So, okay.
Did you guys just work everything?
So I did my, everything was like, to download it, you failed, I tried like, no luck with, like using the Bluetooth studio.
Oh, so I can log in.
Okay.
So one of the things you could do for right now, so do other user, just do student, and do the password one, and then I can create an account for you. So you had a question?
My format's different from yours.
Did you put table? Let's look at your index.
Yeah, probably did some.
So when you did the table, so you didn't put the class equals table. So if I go back, let's go back here. That's the bootstrap thing that makes the table look that way. Otherwise, it just is a table.
Fingers got too fast.
Why I'm getting this underscore? But my name is like, I didn't have an underscore.
First, you didn't have an underscore. I think you do a space.
Yeah, it's a space.
Yeah, so it won't allow
So
space.
it's really
That's why I created an underscore.
Oh. But it's not, it's not a wrong thing to have a space here.
Well, but within the Visual Studio, we cannot change that.
我弄那个 RFC 的，它其实用的是四大的框架。
So it should be small, yeah.
我看有查了。
I did a small one, but I don't know if I
太远
have
了，
to try it.
然后他跟他跟你把一些那个比较确定情况下，
I'm not sure that's going to change.
可以稍微说这个那个风格，我一看有四画，风格就是可以强化，然后这个颜色它都给你定好了，还直接就是
Let's put put the mouse over YouTube.
你看在这儿吧，
Put the mouse over.
Oh,
The name island is not
你看在这里，
but it does.
它的那些
Oh, get rid of the full capital on four.
它都给你设好了，然后你直接
it's a cat too.
I know, but it shouldn't be.
正常来说这里调过来，你看这儿。 然后直接调过来用，然后它就自动，你看已经写好了，然后它就出现小的，然后默认的。然后呢，你不要后来会去那个，刚出来的时候，这块儿上了。
Let's look at your. So.
跟西安的那个挺像的。你像他这个写的你有没有？我都知道是写啊，真的真的真。
What's your file name? Your view name is. Your view name has a lowercase.
大体架构可以。有的语言它那个调用方法是小写的，大写的。当然它你可以写成。
And then let's look at your index.
Can you run it?
No, we can try. So let's do this here. Well, make that video. Let's put this. Here's the super bunch there. We want to see the area. Do view. Have the big top. Now, view limit. There's. No, when we changed index, I think. Alright, we go back to, we change that to, I don't know if this will work. Take it back to there. And then let's go to your controller. You know what I would do? I would copy, copy just off, basically select it all. Delete this.
你也得那个管理推荐，里面有那推荐。对啊。那个点每天
You make a new one?
And then make.
这
I'll come around. I want to show a couple other things.
Oh, yes. Wow. Steve, go ahead, figure it out. Make a button, it builds it, then move over, run it. Oh, now I know how to do it. Perfect timing.
You shouldn't have to build it. I mean, it should
No,
be-
what I'm saying is, for ease of using the GUI, add this build button, so you just click it and then click run.
Yeah, I mean, it builds when it runs, but it's faster right
Oh, so you just click run, it'll just do
now.
that?
It'll build it as it runs.
Okay. It looks pretty.
I'll come around. Let me,
I'll also check.
yeah,
If
you
I can
know what
get
you
it.
might want to do, it might be easier just to
Mhm.
copy that code out to like Notepad or something, kill the controller, kill the view, and then just do it. It might be easier than fixing.
Yeah.
You guys have questions? I think Brian is, okay.
Yeah. It ran.
Okay, yours is.
Yes.
Yours worked okay? Okay. Yours worked okay? How's that?
I'm still having the same problem. I have it all built and then, it won't load that page. So,
So when your controller, so this one is called index, and you have a controller called index.
oh wait, no, I have the mailing.
Right, so under the mailing folder, you have a view, it's called index.
But I had to create that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
wonder why it's doing, your code looks good. I don't know,
Researched, and there's like almost nothing that was like,
this is brand new.
yeah. I think, it might just be because when I when I go to index under mailing, it won't pop up, like you see how you have your stuff highlights and such? I don't know if maybe that's something that's not like connecting or.
I wonder, if you touch the active, is that required?
Just,
Because I'm just wondering if that has to do with.
do you know if there's a way to just process that specific page?
When you try to write for that page, can you?
So that's what I tried to just expand the space.
So it goes back to that.
Yeah, just goes back to that.
What if you did, so on your, so for the URL. Localhost. Can you do like a slash? So slash mailing, whatever you can do. Slash index. Or it actually probably be
Yes.
yes. Trying to load something, let's see what happens. Yeah,
Hi, so I can download it.
you shouldn't have to download it, it's there. So if you do, just do Visual Studio.
Yeah.
2017. And we're gonna set up a virtual machine in the next class. So you don't have to sign in. And then you can choose whatever color thing you want. And it may take a while. I'm not worried about when these come in. So the code for this I will put up on GitHub too.
I wanted to show one other thing, and then I will come debug some more. I wanted to add this to the menu, right? So we have our index here. Did it come up when you did it? It's still loading. That's weird. Not a good sign.
No.
So I'm going to go to the shared folder and the layout. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a link item, and I'm just going to do @HTML action link dot action link. And again, the first one is what you want it to. So I'm going to just say mail list. The first thing is just what you want on the menu to display. The second one is the file name, which is index. Quoted. And then the third thing is the folder, which is mailing. And then I need to close the parentheses. Why did I not close? Oh, I keep doing the single quotes because I've been doing a lot of HTML. Not a lot of HTML, a lot of SQL. All right. So this should add a thing to the main page when I run it. And so now we have a mail list, and when I go there, it goes there. Right. So I'll go back here. This is the text you want to display. This is the name of the file. This is the folder. And the way it's formatted is these are just bootstrap formatting the menu. And you could change, we will when we go in and do other assignments, we'll make bigger changes so that the whole application begins to look like your own instead of this. So
We should save this and like work on this. Should be what we work on for the next couple.
actually, no, this one you don't need to because we're going to move to the, well, you're on your own machine. But we'll start a new project. Once we start a new project next time, though, all the rest of them are part of that same project. This is the one-off, you know, basically to show. Yeah.
You don't have a space there.
No, it shouldn't matter. The space, notice the others do have spaces and they work, and mine doesn't have a space and it works. So if you want to put spaces there, it should be fine. Yeah.
Is that it for the assignment?
Yeah.
Okay. When we do the forthcoming lectures, are we gonna go like in different parts? Like in the lecture, we'll do what's called, what you have it, the book reviews, something.
Yes, we'll do book review for example, and then you'll do community assist.
It's for us.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that as we go.
But those will be the projects each time.
Yes.
And this is where GitHub comes in to show differences as you develop.
Yeah, and I would set up GitHub here, except as I said, it's kind of
Say that for Thursday.
Yeah.
For just an hour.
I am going to post this on GitHub, but for your assignments, for today only, I mean, if you have a GitHub and you want to try putting this up there, you can. Generally, from the web page, it doesn't let you put this on there. You know how in the web page you can, I don't know. We'll spend some time on GitHub, and I'll show you some links. But a lot of times you can drag and drop onto GitHub web page, and it will load it, but it won't load these because there's like 155 files. It's way too much for it. So, a couple of things. If you want to do this with GitHub, I mean, you can do it from the command line, it works, or from the Windows. But I would, for this time, if you want to do, just put it into a document or even a notepad or a Google Doc, and just do the class, the mailing controller, and the view that we created. Just those 3 files in a Google
You
Doc
need
would
the
be.
layout too.
Well, yeah, if you want the layout, but you can do that too. I can trust you did the button if you want, but rather than do the whole thing, if you want, you can just put the parts that we worked in onto a Google Doc and upload that for the assignment. I can tell what they are. So we did NBC. Basically the model that we created, the controller that we created, and the view that we created. Right. So if you wanted to, I will spend some time on GitHub next time. I'm going to post this to GitHub. So if you need, this is a thing we did together. So the code from the first assignment, it will be up on GitHub twice. It'll be from last quarter and this quarter. So if you need to go back to the code to look at it, you can do that. And I'm also going to load the whole thing up, which means that you could clone it if you want, right? And then work on it. So this one is just, this one I'm not so worried about, except to just show you the lay of the land. So I think I'm going to stop the video, which has been running.